So the Environmental Protection Agency, we lead the National Waste Prevention Programme, for those of you who don't know us, and the mission of the National Waste Prevention Programme, which is a statutory programme under the Waste Framework Directive, is to prevent waste and drive the circular economy in Ireland. So we do this through innovation and demonstration programmes, by delivering through partnerships with influential national organisations, and through advocacy and communication for the circular economy. And you may be familiar with the fact that circular economy is under increasing focus at EU and national level through the EU Green Deal and the second Circular Economy Action Plan at EU level, which then draws down into national policy as well. And in Ireland, a waste action plan for a circular economy was published last September, and that's the first national waste policy since 2012, and a real focus on circular economy and the opportunities there are around reuse, design for durability and recyclability, and all things, waste prevention, reuse, repair related, even before you get to a point of having waste and having to manage it for recycling or for disposal. So, the National Waste Prevention Programme is central to, delivering on circular economy, and also the Rediscovery Centre, who are presenting here today, as National Centre for the Circular Economy in Ballymun. So Green Enterprise is one of the EPA's innovation and funding programmes. It's an annual call which focuses on innovation for a circular economy. And we have 4 thematic areas since 2018 in particular, when we really look to refocus the funding on circular economy. So we look at resources and raw materials, plastics, construction and demolition, and food, which are priority thematic areas for circular economy. And our funding is up to 100,000 per project, and we fund public benefit entities, SMEs and non-SMEs in this call. So we're hoping to launch our 2021 call next month, so keep an eye out on EPA social media in relation to that. So just to say, in terms of this webinar series, we started this last year because we realised we wanted to share the findings of all of these diverse and interesting projects with as wide an audience as possible. So please do spread the word about these webinars. We've had 2 previously. We've had one on Probot, which was a plastics related one, making a new composite from recycled PET, and one on minimising fish waste in the supply chain, which Irish Fish Canners gave earlier this month. And we'll have a further 3 in the series next October. And yeah, we just wanted to showcase the findings, give the project owners an opportunity to present on their findings, and have an opportunity for Q&A as well for the audience afterwards. So just on today's webinar, and welcome Sarah Miller. Dr. Sarah Miller, she's the Chief Executive Officer in the Rediscovery Centre, which is, as I said, National Centre for the Circular Economy. They're based in Ballymun in the repurposed boiler house for the Ballymun Flats. It's an eco-designed building, and it's very distinctive for any of you that know the area. But as well as all of the different activities that they do, they have 4 social enterprises on the site. One of them, which is Rediscover Paint, but also Rediscover Furniture, Rediscover Cycling, and Rediscover Fashion. And today's presentation relates to a project that Sarah and the team did on paint and the potential for paint reuse. And as part of that, then they looked at paint reuse and remanufacturing that was happening abroad, and how they could scale up what they'd already done successfully in Ballymun through Rediscover Paint. So I'd like to hand over to Sarah, and she can start her presentation. And
thank you very much, and thank you to the EPA for hosting this event and giving me the opportunity to share our results of the Green Enterprise project with you. As Fiona mentioned, our Green Enterprise project was investigating methods for the expansion of paint reuse programmes in Ireland. So before I start, and Fiona's already given a great introduction to the Rediscovery Centre, just to tell you a little bit about ourselves. We've been working in the area of waste prevention, reuse and circular economy since 2004. Our early years were really focused on local community development, but all of our work has been driven by national and global environmental policy and by evidence-based research. And we take the findings of that research and the policy and we translate it on the ground through community-based action projects. We began as a very small project in Ballymun. As part of Ballymun Regeneration, we were supported by the Government of Ireland and Dublin City Council, and we grew organically for about 10 years, adding new projects in environmental awareness and reuse projects as the opportunities arose. In 2017, with the support of the Department of the Environment, Dublin City Council and the EU LIFE programme, we opened our new centre in Ballymun, as Fiona mentioned, which is a demonstration centre for reuse and the circular economy. In 2018 then, with the help of the Department of the Environment again, and under a strategic partnership with the Environmental Protection Agency, we established the centre as a national centre for the circular economy in Ireland. And this has a much wider geographical remit and a national focus. And we very much see ourselves as a creative movement, connecting people, ideas and resources to support the transition to a circular economy. So today I'm going to talk about our research project, which was focused around our social enterprise Rediscover Paint. Rediscover Paint was established in 2007, so almost 14 years ago, and we've had lots of help along the way, as you can see from all the logos. The objectives of the project were to prevent waste from being generated, prevent waste paint specifically from being generated, to provide affordable reused paint to local communities and the general public, and to demonstrate effective reuse and support of the circular economy. So just looking at the early timeline of the project, we started looking at paint reuse as an idea in 2006. We saw it as an opportunity to create jobs, to prevent good paint from becoming waste, and to make affordable paint available to community reuse, community organisations and people in need. We carried out research in 2006, 2007, and we began working with community Repaint. And in 2007, we set up the first ever paint reuse scheme in Ireland, official paint reuse scheme. Over the following years then, we had a lot of help and a lot of external support from various different organisations, both public sector, funded and private. And in 2007, we entered into discussions with Fingal County Council regarding a potential partnership, and we've been operating a paint reuse service with them ever since. So to give you an understanding, I suppose, of the different operational models, I'm just going to take you through our own evolution up to the start of this research project. So the first stage of our operations was direct reuse. So we were accepting and collecting reusable water-based paints from organisations and businesses in Ballymun, and that took place at 2 community-based recycling centres operating in Ballymun from the basement of the tower blocks in Shangan and Salog. It was supported by Dublin City Council, and we had only 1 part-time community employment staff member at the time. It operated as a community membership scheme, which meant that local community groups and schools paid a fee to avail of the paint that was made available. The process was very much around direct reuse. A lot of the paint was donated from retailers, actually. So we had a lot of paint from Farrow & Ball and Homebase, and we simply checked the contents and made sure they were suitable for reuse, and we passed them on. It was primarily full, unopened tins of paint that had been incorrectly labelled, end-of-line stock, and some shop returns that we were working with. The second level then was a result of the partnership with Fingal County Council. We set up donations to the project at their recycling centres in Coolmine and Estuary, and the Estuary Recycling Centre. And this resulted in higher volumes of paint for reuse. So we started to consolidate paint. We were cleaning it, mixing and repotting. And waste diversion rates at that point were somewhere between 1,000 litres to maybe 1,500 litres a year. And the third phase, we started working with 3 recycling centres. We had larger volumes of paint. We started mixing in larger batches, so 30-litre batches. And we developed a bespoke colour matching service as well. So people could actually request a specific colour or bring in a colour chart and we would match to that colour. We reached maximum capacity with this model at about 5 tonnes per year. And that was really in relation to, you know, staffing, equipment, actual throughput, and also the distribution network and you know, where the market was for the paint. So we realized we had kind of reached a wall, and we started researching and identifying how we might be able to scale and grow the project, both within our own organization and then also working with other organizations. So we started the research project in 2016 after a successful application to the Green Enterprise Programme. And there are 4 main elements to the research. The first was an international review of paint reuse and remanufacturing. The second was to identify barriers to reuse, both actual and perceived. The third, to optimize and expand our own operations and rediscover paint. And the fourth was to develop a model for paint reuse replication. So in assessing good practice for the project, we reviewed both reuse initiatives and support initiatives operating internationally to see what other people were doing and how they were operating. We identified a number of successful paint reuse programs and supports that were operating worldwide. An assessment of these UK, European and international practices presented considerations for us in developing business models for community-based paint reuse in Ireland. So the first organisation, we were obviously very aware with this, are very familiar with it already. Community Repaint is a network operating in England, Wales and Northern Ireland. It's sponsored by Dulux. It currently has a total of 75 locations throughout the UK. And in 2016, the scheme members redistributed 430 tonnes of paint, and they remanufactured 33 tonnes. Collectively, they support 143 employees. They have 56 trainees and 132 volunteers. It's a very successful network. And we looked at their operations and how they were operating. Generally, the scale was quite similar to what we were doing in Rediscover Paint at the time. The majority of community repaint schemes operated in the very same way. They had similar experiences, they had same challenges. They were generally operating between 1 tonne a year and 5 tonne a year. And they were always pretty much involved in something else. So it wasn't a standalone project. They were generally involved in another reuse initiative or other community-based activity. One of the exceptions to this is Seagulls Reuse. They're an independent paint reuse social enterprise operating in Leeds. They've been on the go since 2001. They have a very successful partnership model with the local authority there, and we actually went to visit them and were really impressed by their operations. They're large scale. In 2016, they collected 300 tonnes of paint from Leeds County Council's recycling centres, and their work is supported by about 50 volunteers. It's a really great project. They're very people-centric. They support isolated and marginalised people. They've got amazing branding and a great following, and they're very much seen as a positive community-based organisation. As part of the research, we also visited a larger community paint project in Liverpool that was also involved in remanufacturing. Some of the observations from both those visits, both of them had very strong recognisable branding. In contrast to our organisation, they both provided some repackaged paint alongside their old tins that they were using for direct reuse. So they were repotting into nice, bright, shiny new paint pots. And neither of those reuse organisations operated a membership scheme, and instead they were charging a fee per litre for reprocessing the paint, and then they passed that on to the customer. Two projects we looked at are actually remanufacturing. So New Life Paints has developed a method of remanufacturing paint, which means that they reuse at least 50% reuse paint within the manufacturing process. It involves the addition of new paint pigments and additives, which improve the shelf life and also improve that colour matching service. At the time when we were visiting, there were 2 sites operating in the UK, one in Cambridgeshire and one in Wirral. We visited the one in Wirral, but it was very much at the early stages. We weren't able to get information on the additives. There were no material safety data sheets available for those. But what was really interesting, I think, was the method of their mixing and blending of paints. They had a nice tools and equipment, basically, that could be employed for large-scale mixing. Other than that, they were pretty much the same. It was pretty much the same process as Rediscover Paint, except just bigger and better. And then they had the addition of the pigments and the additives. So Paint 360 is similar, but it's a commercial enterprise, also operating in the UK, and it collects paints, both water and oil-based, which is the difference, I suppose, with New Life. They work with water-based and oil-based paints, and it's a manufacturing process for trade partners rather than retail. And their remanufactured paint contains at least 80% reused paint. They generate income from collecting paint from recycling centres. And again, we didn't get a huge amount of info on the process due to commercial sensitivities. And at the time of the research, it was still very much in its infancy. So then, looking to support and facilitation organisations, Paint Care is run by the British Coatings Federation. So it brings together local and national governments, the waste industry, paint companies and retailers and other stakeholders, and they all work together to solve the problem of leftover paints. At least that's what they say. They definitely promote good practice. They promote the operating reuse and remanufacturing projects in the UK. And there was talk at the time of the potential for them to fund future reuse and paint remanufacturing plans. So then moving to Canada, the Product Care Association has been in operation for over 20 years. It operates Regeneration, which is a paint reuse recycling scheme. It's funded by an eco fee, which is charged to the consumer at the point of purchase. The customer then can drop off leftover paint at various locations throughout the country, at landfill sites, at recycling centres and with retailers. The paint can also be taken for reuse from specific paint share sites, and then any unwanted waste is recycled and remanufacturing. So it's direct reuse, recycling and remanufacturing. In 2016, the eco fee was 35 Canadian cents per litre, and that generated more than $7 million for the Canadian government and for the scheme. In 2016, paint collected was over 4,000 tonnes. The majority of it, however, was recycled rather than reused. It was 81% was recycled into other paint products or used in cement-based products. And then 2.8% of it was actually reused. So Paint Care in the USA is a not-for-profit organisation operated by the American Coatings Association and supports several paint manufacturers in several states. In 2016, it was operational in 9 states. Again, it's supported by a paint stewardship legislation. So there's a paint levy applied to the consumer cost of paint. In 2016, it collected more than 22,000 tonnes of paint. 3.5% of that paint was reused and the rest was recycled, although some states have achieved much higher levels of reuse. For example, Minnesota has a reuse rate of 12%. But generally there were more around 3%, 4% operating in the US. In the United States as well, they have a very successful paint recycling organisation, GDB, and they recycled 446 million litres of paint in 2016, and that's probably one of the world leaders in paint recycling. And they have a brand called Evolve. Then looking to Australia, so Paint Back again is a paint stewardship scheme. It's funded by a levy on paint products of 15 cents a litre. It includes 21 industrial members and 50 collection sites, and it's a collaboration again between the governments, commercial and social enterprises. Unwanted paint is returned to the Paint Back collection site and is treated, separated from the packaging. Containers are 100% recycled and waste paint is collected and treated to make it suitable for energy recovery. So there's not a lot of reuse here. There's small amounts of reuse through schools and community organisations, but the majority of paint is recycled. Then Reseen Paintwise is the paint reuse scheme, which is in operation in New Zealand. Paint is left at shops and recycling centres and redistributed to community organisations and groups. and then any additional paint that is left over is used by local authorities in construction projects. It's partially funded by charging the non-resin paint delivered to drop-off centres through the country. And again, this is supported by Resin, a paint manufacturer in Dulux. So that's kind of the overview of the international review. We then looked to assess, I suppose, our own opportunities here and trying to get a feel for the interest and activity in Ireland. We carried out a survey of local authorities. We gathered information relating to paint reuse and the amount of paint collected. We also gathered information relating to the perceived barriers and drivers for paint reuse. And we investigated the potential opportunity for future collaboration as well. We unfortunately had only a 25% rate on the response to the survey. However, 50% of those surveys noted that they were operated directly by a local authority. 70% of recycling centres that responded actually accepted paint, 74% accepted paint, and then 100% of those that didn't showed an interest in wanting to set up a paint reuse project, or at least being involved in paint reuse. From the limited data we did receive, we can see that the Dublin Regional Paint Collection Service is quite significant. So we're currently collecting somewhere, well, in 2016, we were collecting over 621 tonnes per year. I suppose just looking at that, we carried out an audit with Wicklow County Council and found that of all of the paint that they collected on one day, 25% of that would have been suitable for reuse by our organisation. So maybe just highlighting that, you know, alone within the Dublin region, we're probably looking at an opportunity of 150 tonnes of paint that is suitable for reuse. We also carried out a desktop study on estimating the total waste produced in Ireland, which we estimated in 2018 over 5,000 tonnes, and urban paint at 1,700 tonnes. So again, a lot of paint available there for reuse, and certainly the scale that we're operating at the moment, we wouldn't be able to, I suppose, manage all of that paint within our own operations. So again, this question of scale is really important. So the second part of the research was to look at the opportunities for expanding paint reuse. So the third part of the project was to look at opportunities for expanding our own paint operations at the Rediscovery Centre. And through the international review and through review of our own operations, we identified some barriers that were, I suppose, acting as a deterrent to our scale. So mixing procedures was certainly something that was of concern. We were mixing small volumes. It was particularly heavy work. There was a lot of manual handling. I guess through this project, we identified new mixing systems and more automated work, and we were able to put new systems in place. We also looked at collection and distribution systems. So at the time, our work was very much limited to North Dublin, particularly in relation to sales. We were able to put into place an online sales service. We were able to look at collaborations with other social enterprises, and we were just at the process before the lockdown at looking, working with charity shops as well to distribute paint, reuse paint with them. Paint colours was a bit of an issue to us, I suppose, at the Rediscovery Centre. This matching to a specific colour was very time consuming, and also the revenue available, or the cost that we could charge for that, really limited how much of it we could do. Paint life expectancy was seen as a barrier. It wasn't something we had necessarily witnessed within our own organisation. The economics of the project was also identified as an issue. Most of our operations that we deliver in paint reuse at a cost which is much lower than any commercial operator. So again, that's something that means we have to be careful, I suppose, with the agreements that we set up and make sure that they make sense for us to actually be engaged in the work. There is no levy here applied, like you can see in some of the other countries. So it is very important to kind of weigh up the economics and make sure that it makes sense for us to take the paint from the recycling centres and to charge an appropriate cost to remove that paint. And then in terms of waste legislation, that was just identified as a barrier, but as we are involved very much in direct reuse and the paint is donated specifically to the recycling centres and to the social enterprises for direct reuse, the legislative considerations aren't a concern. We have applied for and received Article 11 exemptions for reuse organisations and have been doing that with other organisations that we work with. So in terms of the mixing, we took on board the setup at the larger remanufacturing sites in the UK, and we adapted their model to create a workable model for large-scale reuse for ourselves. It incorporates lifting equipment, mechanical mixing and decanting, and it's been operational since probably 2018 and is working very well. We began implementing all of the recommendations in 2018. New payment structures were introduced and the membership was abandoned. The introduction of pre-mixed paint for sale was introduced. So we developed a line of on-trend colours rather than providing a bespoke paint matching service. We looked to trends in the market and then presented 8 to 9 on-trend colours, which is what a lot of the UK organisations were doing. We introduced new paint pots, which resulted in increases of the sales of paint sold directly through the shop, and definitely opened up a new customer base for us. And we were able to increase, obviously, our paint production through all of these amendments. The implemented actions resulted in us being able to reuse a lot more paint and allowing the project to scale and grow. That work was supported by the Department of the Environment during 2018 and 2019. And as you can see here from the slides, there's a significant jump between 2018 and 2019 when we started to implement the new operations. Unfortunately, in 2020, when we were forced to close for several months, our paint reuse figures took a bit of a hit. But even looking at, I suppose, the figures from Q1 last year, we were reusing approximately 5 tonnes within the first quarter. So extrapolating that, we would have expected to have, hit our best year ever, and we would have expected to reuse 20 tonnes of paint in 2020 had things been normal. With respect to our own operations here, we have been exploring options also with South Dublin County Council and with Meath County Council, and we hope to deliver new reuse projects with them shortly. So then through the project, we also looked at opportunities for replication and for the potential of a national rollout. We presented 4 models based on scale, so direct reuse model, small model, a medium and a large, and each of those were identified having regard to resources available and tools and equipment. We then drew up a template highlighting the different models and the potential scale of operation, and also noting some of the high-level requirements such as tools, transport, training, premises, etc. I'm not sure if you can see this on the slide, but obviously the report is available for anyone who's interested in the detail of the replication model. I suppose what's important is that we've been using the replication model since to work with other social enterprises to develop paint reuse projects throughout Ireland. We identified some high-level elements that were necessary for successful replication. That was the capacity to collect and store and mix paint, obviously, good working relationships with the local authority, access to a steady supply of paint that is suitable for reuse, and then a ready market for the sale of affordable paint and reuse. And they're the 4 factors that we would obviously assess at the beginning of any project to see if those factors exist and there's a willingness and an interest in developing a paint reuse programme. We also presented a high-level methodology just for assessing paint and paint reuse opportunities as part of the project. So in conclusions, I suppose this Green Enterprise funded project was successful and worthwhile as a translational research project. It impacted directly on the reuse organisations of our own operations and those of others. It highlighted the potential to create a number of paint reuse initiatives across the country, and it also noted sufficient volumes of paint available to do this. And finally, it presented a model for paint reuse replication. And then just in terms of the work to date, as noted, our own project has grown significantly since this research concluded. Under a strategic partnership with the Environmental Protection Agency, we established the Circular Economy Academy in 2018, and that supports social enterprises adopting circular economy models. Some of the members of the Circular Economy Academy are now working in paint reuse, and we've been working with, supporting, are going to support, or currently supporting new initiatives in Cork County, in Limerick City, in Cork City, in Waterford County, in Longford and in Donegal. And all of these have been supported in collaboration with local authorities, and some also have received funding through the LAPN fund. As I said, we're also looking at new projects in South Dublin and County Meath. And then finally, another very exciting part of this project, which we hope to launch slowly or very shortly, is the creation of a national paint reuse network. So we've been working in this for over a year, and that will provide support not just to establish social enterprise organisations or paint reuse organisations, but also to projects and small-scale initiatives across Ireland, regardless of their scale. So as I say, that's something we hope to be launching in the very near future, and hopefully lots of initiatives will be able to benefit from the development of that network. And I think, yeah, on that, I conclude the presentation and look forward to your questions. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Thank you very much, Sarah. It's great actually to see that the outcomes from the project are continuing, and that you've continued to scale up and you've moved regionally. That second last slide there where you were saying the outreach across so many different counties at this stage. It's super to see that, and even more exciting the launch of the national network as well.